Hello, welcome to the Value-Wide React fourth quarter of 2021 infrastructure update. My name is AJ Grantham, K6LOR. I typically provide an update to the team, usually annually right now. I've got a lot of work schedule conflicts and Boy Scout schedule conflicts for the monthly meetings. This time around, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to drop in for December for the meeting, but I wanted to at least pass along this information as I believe it's very helpful to kind of have an insight as to where we're at as far as our infrastructure is concerned, where we came from, and really what our vision is looking like moving forward. So our intro, just a little bit about myself, capabilities that we currently have within the team, both in the amateur and the LMR space, our communication network vision, which is what we try to use to craft and kind of hone what our decision-making processes are for engineering, investment, and deployment of our network, the reasons why we upgrade, and then kind of go over up to date what we've done in about the last 3 to 4 years within the React repeater network for our Wilderness Ridge site, the Crest Condos site, our portable amateur repeaters, and then some of the LMR and GMRS stuff that we have in the works. Some updated engineering data that we've been able to compile, and then finally what our 2022 projects roadmap looks like. And when we get to that slide, it's actually truly 2022 plus. So when we set out back in about 2015, 2016 to develop our roadmap, we had about 3 months worth of work, and we're just reaching the tail end of that right now. You'll find when you're working in the volunteer space, especially with amateur radio, especially with some of the sites that we have access to, we don't get to do everything at the pace that we would if we were doing it for, like, instance, at work, where we had 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week to focus on it. And we had dedicated resources and finances to support that. So a little bit about myself. My name is AJ, K6LOR. A lot of you know me or know of me. There are a lot of new members on the team, a lot of new amateurs in the area. So I want to just kind of give you just kind of an update, a little bit about myself. I've been in amateur radio since 1997, originally as a Boy Scout. I've been active in the React team for about the last 15 years. Telecom overall, I've been active in for over 20, so it is kind of the trade that I jumped into in high school, and I've been in ever since. Working in fixed wireless, working in the telco industry for the phone company, working on the RF side for wildland fire and state law enforcement. And then most recently, the last 15 years, I've spent working for Cable One Sparklight and cable and fiber broadband. My responsibility within the React team right now is primarily behind the scenes. When my son was born, I kind of shifted almost exclusively into that role. He has just turned 11 this summer, so it's been a while. But previously, I was doing 10 to 15 events a year and was pretty active on the traffic control side of things. My responsibility now within the React team is really infrastructure engineering, deployment, and investment. And then my day job, I'm a deployment manager at Sparklight. I manage a team of project coordinators that build fiber optic cable into cell towers, mountaintops, businesses, government buildings, that sort of thing. So some of the things I've been working on behind the scenes, which I have deployed a couple of times. So I've got an LMR narrowband analog VHF repeater that I'll get into a little bit later. That's in a Pelican case that I was able to throw together. I also have a kit of 10 LMR DMR radios, analog and digital radios. They're kitted up very similar to what I used when I was working in federal fire. Both of those kits, throw in the back of the truck, get to the event, deploy them. It makes a world of difference. The other element that I've been working on, which has kind of evolved over the years, is for the Willow Creek Boy Scout event that we've supported going on, the team supported it directly 13, maybe 14 years at this point. It has not happened the last 2 years due to the pandemic, but they are meeting now to plan for one in 2022 in April. So there's two things that we really support there. One is logistics for their camp staff. So our current iteration of that is we deploy the LMR repeater and deploy the kit of handheld radios and give those to their staff. Ourselves on the REACT side of things, and then the Civil Air Patrol, who's come in to help us for the scoring mission. They use that as a training mission for their cadets. Between all of that, we've got pretty large amount of RF up in that canyon on the west side of Squaw Butte, usually third or fourth weekend of April. In addition to that, for about the last 5 years, we've been using some amateur microwave links, partnering with our friends at SafeLink, who is now called Anthem Broadband. One of their network managers is a ham who's active in Scouts, active in Civil Air Patrol, and has assets up on top of Squaw Butte. So it's beamed down a microwave link into the valley, and then we've taken care of distribution for kind of a private Wi-Fi network that we can use for communication out of the region with Wi-Fi calling. We use it for text messaging. We use it to transfer files. We also use it primarily for keeping tabs on the weather radar, because that is really an area of concern. You're kind of in a slot canyon at Willow Creek, and the weather tends to roll in rather quickly coming out of the west. So that's something that we've utilized quite a bit over the years. The central picture here, the center picture, is iteration from about 7 or 8 years ago. Inside that orange Pelican case was actually a Verizon LTE hotspot. So there is some cell coverage if you get up onto the top of the ridgeline, and we were able to use that as our backbone, and using little nanostation local radio to pull up the Wi-Fi coming off the hotspot, and then backfeed that on a 2.4 gig link across the canyon, then drop that from the parking lot down into the admin area, where they were able to utilize it to keep an eye on logistics. So our current capabilities. So right now we have 3 fixed amateur repeaters under the call sign W7BWR. It's the 146.78 repeater and the 444.725 repeaters. Those are up at Wilderness Ridge, which is on the way up to Bogus Basin on the left-hand side. Those are about 6,800 feet. So pretty good visibility, a high noise floor at that site. So it's a good hub location, but not great for sensitivity or selectivity for that matter, which is really the case for all of the amateur repeaters that are up on the mountains at this point. The noise floor, the higher up, the more you can receive, the higher the noise floor is. And subsequently, the more that your receiver has to fight in order to find the actual intended signal. The third fixed repeater that we currently have is at Crest Condos. That's right off of Americana in downtown Boise, and we use that repeater primarily for special events that are going on south of State Street in downtown Boise, and that is on 444.275. Portable repeaters, we actually just deployed this latest iteration pictured to the right. That is a kit that Steve Hansen worked over the summer on, using one of the DR1Xs that we had. Those are set to 25 watts, and then we also have a custom radio manufacturing, which actually predates Daniels, which is the super low current consumption mountaintop repeaters, MT2, MT3, MT4Es that the Forest Service used. It's an 8-watt repeater that draws something silly like 15 milliamps when it's not in use, and it swings up to like 1.5 amps when it's transmitting. So we've used it up at Willow Creek in the past. You can put a very small battery on it and a solar panel and leave it, and it'll handle pretty much all the communication needs that you have as long as it's well placed. We also have the 444.275 Motorola GR1225. We've kind of alternated on that between our LMR allocation, the 464 pair, and the 444 pair. You'll notice that GR1225 portable repeater is the same frequency as the Crest Condos fixed repeater, and I'll get into that a little bit further in detail later on. We also have an LMR license, also known as business band or an IG allocation, FCC allocation, for the team on the call sign WQPH 983. And there's a slew of frequencies listed there. I've personally built a suitcase repeater, and then I also have obviously the kit of radios that I personally own for that deployment. We primarily use for scout stuff. And then we also have a GE Master 3 that's a narrowband and analog, and also have the capability of dropping in a P25 digital card into it. Repeater that is partially deployed, so electronics are good to go. That fits into a cabinet, and it's currently out at Russ N7 SMA's location. It just needs feed line and antenna in order to get it turned up the rest of the way. So that was a project that we started working down, and then other priorities came up. So that one we can pick back up on. So important things that we drive, having a vision, kind of a mission. Our mission is to provide public service to the community. We use amateur radio and all the other options that we have in order to be able to fulfill that mission. Our communications network vision is really what we use to kind of form our decision making as far as upgrades and things that we look into, things that we invest in, and whether it makes sense for us or it makes sense for another group to get into, like ISRA or VOI or what have you. So our current network vision is to provide handheld coverage for 90% of the regular Boise Valley events that the team supports through fixed repeaters, and we are working towards that. Really, we have the portable repeaters as an option to really fill in that other 10%, as well as out of area events like Sawtooth Relay as an example, up towards Ketchum and Stanley, where there's not really good resources in place as far as fixed full-time repeaters. But getting into handheld coverage really there's a shift more or less to UHF in order to make that happen, which means smaller repeater footprints, so less on mountaintops and more valley coverage in key locations. The next component to our network vision is set and forget. So we'll do annual preventive maintenance to make sure everything's good to go. Schedule that during the summertime, one, when schedules are more available, and two, when we have access into a lot of these locations. Wilderness Ridge, if we have a major snowstorm, we could go 6 to 12 weeks before we could get access back into it, just because of the conditions of the road. The other component of that, which we are kind of on the tail end of right now, is doing major upgrades every 10 years. What we didn't want to keep doing was fix it good enough to get through till next year, or fix it till we had time to get back to it. We really wanted to do things properly the first time so that the tools, the amateur radio equipment that we have deployed, truly serves us and we're not serving it. So another element to that is developing a linked network of amateur radio repeaters within the valley to support reliably handheld coverage end to end. So what that looks like right now is we currently have Wilderness Ridge and Rimcrest Condos deployed. We also have a third fixed site that we're currently doing the engineering on in preparation, which will cover the western side of the valley out towards Caldwell. And then as we see events develop, because we see like Middleton has a couple parades, Caldwell has a parade. There's things that we support on that side of the valley that were too far out because of the noise floor to be able to get into these mountaintop repeaters. That we're able to start deploying linked repeaters so that it doesn't require getting onto one of the mountaintop assets in order to be able to talk from one event to the next, and then being able to knock that down remotely on the fly if we do run multiple events at the same time. We've had Veterans Day and Zeitgeist half marathon run consistently on the same dates for a long time, and being able to have multiple repeaters up at the same time really has helped us be able to continue to fulfill that mission without stepping on each other's events. Using LMR equipment as a force multiplier. And I bring this up because I set this up with the Willow Creek Boy Scout event. So in the past, when I first became involved in the event, it was a challenge because we had the scoring mission was kind of our primary purpose up there. There's no cell coverage. The event kicks off around 8 a.m. It doesn't wrap up till about 7 p.m. You're exposed to the weather. It's in mountainous terrain. You can't drive to the vast majority of the locations that the radio operators need to be situated to support that. Additionally, there's a lot of people that are moving around that need shadowed. That again, I think at one point, I think in 2007, I believe we had a total of 14 React volunteers. Almost all of them are amateurs. And it's not the typical event where they give you a hamburger or a t-shirt at the end. We're just there to serve. And with that event, it became extremely difficult to recruit that many people to help fill all those stations and to shadow the logistics and the administrative staff. So we started experimenting initially with FRS. And then we started deploying LMR equipment. And LMR equipment has been kind of a game changer for us. Because with LMR, I don't have to staff a person, a volunteer, an amateur radio operator, a React member with every person that needs a radio. I can just hand them a radio, put it on channel, and give them very basic instructions, tell them not to swear, that kind of thing. And then if they have problems, they're able to self-support at that point. And my interaction on the radio side since I've been able to deploy LMR consistently has been setting it up on Friday afternoon and knocking it down Sunday afternoon, and not really having either to support bringing a dozen amateurs 15 miles off pavement and all the logistics needs that they require, nor does it really require, there's a different level of interaction when we have to shadow individuals. So that's been a multiplier for us, and trying to find more ways that we can leverage that, which we've got some stuff that I can further discuss as we get deeper into the presentation. So command repeaters, we're referred to like North Command, that's the VHF side. For overall access and visibility to amateur community, I think we do need to remain visible to the amateurs in the Valley. So that one for recruiting, and two so that we we can demonstrate that we are still actively doing stuff, and it really piques interest and gets folks involved. I started getting involved when I was 12 years old as a volunteer because of what I had heard on the radio, supporting, I think, a bike race in California at the time. Our ops repeaters or operations repeaters are really there for logistics, and that's it's twofold. One is I can deploy more of them and reuse the same pairs just because of the RF path makes sense, by utilizing different PL pairs, using different CT CSS tones. We can reuse the same repeater frequency pairs where the coverage doesn't lap or minimally overlaps, which I've got some maps that'll kind of illustrate that a little bit further. But by moving to UHF and having the smaller footprints, we're able to use lower power, and we're able to utilize handhelds that when you get into kind of a urban or city environment or a building environment, we really struggle with multipath and just RFI coming from practically everything. If you have a LED light bulb in your house, more than likely it's generating some level of RFI. By shifting to UHF, we see a significantly lower noise floor, which means we can get better coverage as a result. So why upgrades? So let's talk about as-built. As-built being what's currently there. So when we started with the Wilderness Ridge project, I've upgraded, I think, 3 times now, and then we started discussing upgrades in 2018 into 2019. So North Command, the 14678 was a Motorola MSR 2000. It was currently at the time on a Cushcraft high gain amateur grade antenna. And this isn't necessarily a great picture of this site. It does show snow, but typically we would see anywhere from 1/4 inch to 2 inches of ice cladding on every surface, including on the antenna. So anytime that we had wind, anytime that we had significant rain fade, it was because we were running into issues with the antenna itself. The moisture was getting into the joints and it was flexing too much. Additionally, the feed line, so the coax coming off the pole, down the pole, and up to the building, on both the VHF and the UHF side had, I believe, at least 3 splices. One had 4 splices by the time it got into the building. Different types of cable, just kind of not ideal, not a best practice. Our North Ops repeater 444-725 was actually on a surplus LMR antenna, a 450 to 470 antenna. It has reasonable SWR on the ham band, but not ideal. Again, same issue, multiple feed lines spliced together. Crest Condos. So that was using a borrowed MSR 2000s 25-watt repeater, so lower power UHF repeater. We were experiencing some issues with talk in and talk out. Coverage wasn't what it should have been. It wasn't matching what our RF propagation software said it should be. And as a result, we really had some concerns there. When it was originally deployed, we used a brand new amateur fiberglass mid-gain antenna and 75 ohm feed line, small feed line, because we were trying to fit through an existing small hole in the wall. Neither of those were ideal. The challenge at Crest Condos is that there are aesthetics concerns from the actual condo management. So we're limited. I can't put a high gain dipole array antenna there. Really, it has to be just a stick and has to really kind of blend in with the rest of the building. So technology, both the MSR 2000 and the GE Master 2 were crystal controlled. The MSR 2000 is fairly complex to try to interface to an external controller. Both of these repeaters were new mid to late 70s. So their heyday was before I was born. The Master 2 actually has a specific issue with whiskers that kind of get onto part of the receiver, kind of like pre-selector first stage, that just developed because of the materials that were used that caused some serious issues with sensitivity, and there's really no workaround for that. So both of those a little bit on the older side. Support became an issue as well. So in the surplus market, the effect of the narrowband mandate, which was 2010, really just decimated the available stock that was on eBay, Craigslist, eHam, QRZ, everywhere that we would be able to go to if we needed spare parts, because these repeaters were modular. So if something failed, usually you could just pull a card out and drop in a new card, and you could get back up and running with a little bit of alignment. But the availability of those parts became more and more scarce. Additionally, because they were crystal controlled, Bomar and International Crystal were kind of the go-to suppliers that actually cut crystals, actually created crystals. They became to the point where it just wasn't feasible for their business to continue because less and less was crystal controlled, and one of them actually ended up just closing out altogether, and the other one's not particularly amateur friendly anymore. Their pricing, if you needed a new pair of crystals, one for receive, one for transmit, was north of $200 the last time I checked, which was kind of the catalyst for us to start making the move towards solid state equipment that we can support. Information access is another issue. The number of mentors and the institutional knowledge of the folks that worked on this when it was new and continued to work on it in the amateur community once it became surplus became fewer and fewer. Unfortunately, we are losing our mentors. We're losing our Elmers as they reach end of life. It's much like the equipment. These folks just don't live forever either. So it became more and more difficult to find folks that, one, could work on the equipment, and two, could share that knowledge and be able to pass it down. The issue also is that the learning curve was very high. So if one person needed to learn it, then it wasn't like something that they could quickly share with 5 other people that also helped out. It would be kind of a mentoring um, uh, process in order to try to get them up to speed. So to date, since we really started this project in earnest in 2018, it really kicked off with there was a great offer, at least we thought at the time, from Yaesu for their system fusion repeaters. So it was the DR1X FR, which is a factory refurbished version, 3-year warranty. They're dual bands. They do VHF or UHF or crossband. They were $400 a piece. Which, when we're looking at some of the surplus parts and we're starting to try to add up what are we going to need in order to have sufficient equipment to get us 10 years worth of not necessarily worry-free operation out of the existing crystal controlled equipment that we had, but just enough equipment to support 10 years worth of repairs, these repeaters were much, much cheaper than that. And we'll get into that a little bit further on. So within 2019 was really a ramp-up year where we secured significant amounts of capital equipment. So the main repeater antennas at both sites were purchased. Brand new feed line was purchased. In 2020, we opted to shift to the MTR 2000, which is a public safety grade 100-watt repeater. We purchased 5 of those, 3 in UHF, 2 in VHF. At the time, from another amateur club that had just gotten surplus Quantars, which is another Motorola public safety grade repeater. They had just upgraded to those, and these were surplus their needs, so we were able to opt for them. As best I can tell, these sat on the shelf most of their life and weren't really used. When I look at the hours utilized on them, and what was programmed into them originally, it was VTAC and UCall mutual aid frequencies for a state police agency on the East Coast. Wouldn't be something that would be used, nonstop like a typical dispatch channel. So upgrades in 2020, and then 2021, we've had probably about another $1,000 worth of pieces, parts, and bits. So just because you bought a repeater doesn't mean that you have everything ready to go. There's cables for interfacing, both on the RF side and on the IO side. There's equipment racks and shelving and everything that we were able to secure at surplus pricing or donated. Still adds up, and of course the cost of everything with supply chain being a major constraint right now, as it's really a side effect of the pandemic. Unfortunately, it costs what it costs. But we make very smart decisions on what we do invest in, and we make sure that what we do buy, we only buy once. We're not cutting corners to where we're buying something that's only going to last a season. So sparing expense, so we have at this time 1 VHF and 1 UHF MTR 2000 that are in spare stock. They're not currently deployed or currently placed anywhere within our network. We also have a DR1X that's currently in that same status. And those are really just there to sit on a shelf as our backup equipment in the event something goes sideways. It's much easier to grab that off the shelf, go to the mountaintop or go to the condo building, swap it out with a working chassis, and then troubleshoot the one that's having issues back at home as time allows, and still have our network up and running, as opposed to taking the whole repeater down and being off the air for if something happens in October and the snowfall hits, it may not be until the spring before we're able to get the repeater back up on the air. So DR1X modifications were something that we kind of jumped headfirst into in 2019. So essentially you've got 2 mobile radios. You've got the receiver on the right side and the transmitter on the left side. The transmitter's got the bigger heat sink on it. These are both based on a FTM 400 mobile radio, so they're not exactly ideal. The way that they were called out to us was kind of repeater grade specifications. In reality, when we started putting them on the meters, putting them on the service monitor, and really giving them kind of what real life looks like, we really ran into some selectivity issues that just weren't acceptable to run at any of our sites. The noise floors are pretty high, so your radio receiver needs to be pretty selective to ignore those adjacent channel issues. So the telltale sign was we had everything ready to go, racked up, brought it up to wilderness, and it immediately keyed when we plugged it in. And as we adjusted on the front panel on the squelch was up almost 75% before it actually closed. So versus only like 5% of the first notch when it was down the valley on the test bench. Additionally, there are some issues that we ended up having to replace the internal cables because they were RG58, which is a very poorly shielded cable. So these are RG400, not to be confused with LMR 400. This is a double shielded cable with a Teflon jacket. We opted to replace the cables on the internal on one pair, or actually two pair, or two repeaters for the ones that went up to wilderness to try to get that cleaned up. And then we did not do that for the third one because it never actually ended up getting deployed to Rim Crest. We made the MTR project at that point. So October 2019, we've gathered everything, we're ready to go. And we had experienced issues on the UHF side was of North Ops, so the 444-725 really struggled once when things heated up. When the PA was heated up, it would slowly reach the point where you just couldn't talk into it anymore. The receiver pretty much lost its sensitivity. The VHF side had issues with snap, crackle, pop that we were encountering because of antenna issues, and then we were also running into some other interfacing issues that it just wasn't behaving the way that it was supposed to. So our first iteration of major equipment upgrade, which was really we got to get everything going before the snow hits. We dropped in a pair of DRR1Xs, brand new rack, brand new surge suppressor, brand new UHF duplexer. We opted for the RCOM RC210 repeater controller, and then over on the next shelf to the left there that's not in the picture is the VHF duplexer. What we found when we reached the site was that there was actually a good reason why we had some selectivity issues and sensitivity issues. There was actually an FM broadcaster that had been installed on the same pole that we're on, just feet below where we were at, putting out 100 watts on 102.7. That also blocked our ability to climb that pole. So we ended up temporarily for the winter mounting the antenna onto an abandoned power mast on the building. This is the new Sinclair dual band dipole array that we installed. This was not ideal because this is a metal roof that was kind of in the way, so it kind of caused some reflections, which we did see as far as reflected power. Not bad enough that it was going to shut things down, but just not ideal coverage to get us through permanently. Fast forward to June of 2020, we ended up doing a full replacement on the rack at the same time that we dropped in the MSR 2000s, which are the larger Motorola repeaters here. We've shifted the VHF duplexer down to the floor, so it's all in the same footprint. And then we rented a man lift to move the dual band Sinclair antenna off of the bottom of the building up to the top of the pole. We also replaced all of the feed lines. So there's two feed lines going to the Sinclair dual bander, and then also this third antenna on the right-hand side was the North Ops repeater, the 444-725 repeaters antenna, the LMR antenna. We went ahead and recabled that as well, even though we're not currently using it. This kind of cool Cyclops looking thing is that FM broadcast antenna that was kind of mounted in place. These braces across the back are in place to keep the antenna itself from physically twisting, but it prevents us from being able to climb the pegs on the pole itself to do the work. In hindsight, getting the man lift makes this way easier anyways. So moving forward, if we have to do any more work, absolutely lobby to make sure that we get a regular aerial lift to do that. In I think it was April, May of 2021, the site owners reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've got another broadcaster that's going to go into the room that you guys are in. So we actually need you guys to relocate all of your gear out." So this is Steve Hansen here. We pulled the cable out of the 2-inch conduit that we had buried about 10 years ago when we were moved into this room. We went ahead and pulled that out carefully, stored it at the base of the pole, and then we moved the rack up into what was the apartment, which is where the old site owner used to live. And the understanding was the penetration and everything else will be done in about a week. And unfortunately, I think we were offline clear into October. So they placed a brand new ice bridge between the pole and the building, and then the penetration into the wall, which they just used just a temporary boot for us. So with Tyler and Steve and I, we went ahead and pulled in the cable into the building, chopped connectors on it, and got the repeaters back up on the air. So that was the VHF and the UHF that we did at that time. So we also worked on bonding and grounding, which we had been disconnected previously. So when they did the relocate, they actually shifted our entire rack out of the way, which actually bent some feed line, caused some issues, which was not great. But with that, the MTR 2000s, we did not have the controller in place, so they were not linked and they were not remote controllable at the time. Our control for those was there was a timeout timer, and if there was a problem, we just drove up and we were going to turn it off manually. So in November 2021, we went ahead and brought in bonding out from the rack. So we've got grounding and bonding scored up. We brought back in the RCOM RC210 controller, which now has the VHF and UHF linkable. Most of the time they're linked, but they can be knocked down if necessary. They can also be turned off remotely, which was something that we were running into issues with trying to do in standalone configuration. We also installed a ground bus and then bonded everything on the external side between the ice bridge and the building, from the building to the pole, and to the pole down to the ground array. So a lot of people have asked, I see this pole or these towers up on the side of the road when I'm driving up to Bogus, what is what? We're on the farthest right wooden pole. This pole is about 40 feet tall to the tip. We're the center antenna on that. We have this UHF LMR antenna as a spare. We had a link antenna, but it was kind of the same case. It had like 3 different splices in it, so we wrecked out that cable when we were recabling the pole with the new 1/2-inch feed line that we went to. And then just for stuff that's also up on these big white panel arrays, these are all UHF digital TV. So like shopping channels, Spanish language stuff, that's all where those signals are coming from. There's also LTE cellular for AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile at this site, and soon to wreck out Sprint, primarily to feed up to the ski resort. So it feeds down Bogus Basin road coverage, and then this array is actually feeding aimed up north, heading over to to Bogus Basin. Within the rack, we've got everything squared up now and all within the existing footprint, and we also do have permission to drop in a second rack where we will probably be working on some linking and some additional site monitoring telemetry hardware in the future. So we've kind of standardized on the trip light surge suppressor for all of our sites. We've got the Motorola MTR 2000. That's the VHF one. We've since actually swapped these. So the VHF one's actually down at the bottom of the rack. And then we've kind of moved things around just to give us more space and shorten the jumpers between the VHF repeater and the VHF duplexer on the bottom. We do run OCI, which is the spin-off of what DCI, the bandpass filters, used to buy in AES's catalog. They work fantastically as a pre-selector with the amount of noise that we see up at the site. It's really necessary just to pat it down enough to where the receiver has a fighting chance. The receivers do have kind of an agile pre-selector built in the repeater, but the more we reduce the noise floor and the total channel power coming into the receiver port, the better off those function. Not shown, we've got polyphasers kind of hiding back behind there. And then we're using, there's the spare antenna, UHF antenna is also terminated in there. We just have to connect up. So Crest condo upgrades that were done in 2020. I was not able to help out on that one. I had some other conflicts going on, but we were able to kit that up. So we've got a ComTelco 5.5 dB extreme duty antenna. That fiberglass antenna that's on the building right now really is because it's aesthetically pleasing. It's not because it's the best functioning. But that antenna is rated for 135 mile per hour winds. It's about 2.5 inches in diameter at the base, about 2 inches at the top, and is DC grounded at the tip. So that is always kind of the concern with lightning when you put a fiberglass antenna up. Is it going to be a source of where lightning is going to blow the thing into bits? But as a result, this one is kind of functioning not like that. We did rework all the bonding and the grounding, and then the existing repeater, which was the borrowed MSR 2000 from David K6CWD, was still in place at the time of this upgrade. And then when we came out, it was Tyler and I were able to make this upgrade. Dropped in standardized rack that half rack that we've used that we had up at Wilderness. It's plenty of space for this particular site. So same trip light, UHF MSR or MTR 2000 100 watt OCI filter, and then a Sinclair bandpass band reject duplexer. Currently in standalone mode, on the roadmap to add a RC210 controller to it. So one of the other things that we've been working on in the last couple of years is our LMR and GMRS project. We were able to acquire 50 UHF Motorola mobiles, 25 watt mobiles, pictured down here in the bottom right corner from one of our local hams that had a relationship with an LMR business in town. For practically less than what they would have gone for if they had gone to a recycler. So just ridiculously low price. So we've reserved a group of those for RF linking and sparing. They're a great option both for LMR for the 464 and 469 pairs that we have licensed to us. They're also a great option for GMRS. They'll also program within that same range. Additional LMR gear that we've got, GE Master 3 that's P25 capable. That just needs a house. That's housed currently in Caldwell. It just needs a location if we want to deploy VHF. I think it's a 100 watt repeater, so it shouldn't have any issues. We just need to find a location for it. GR1225 is currently in reserve right now, just looking for a location. And then additional options also for GMRS. Wilderness, we've got a antenna and feed line already in place and rack space. It's just a matter of determining if that's the direction we want to take the team to deploy a GMRS repeater up there. That wouldn't be a particularly heavy lift to do so. So I'm going to turn off the video here for a second. There we go. So current repeater sites, so up at Wilderness Ridge, which is up towards Bogus Basin. We've got Crest Condos, which is downtown. And then we have a future location, which we're referring to as Hoot Tower, which is in the Purple Sage Caldwell region, out towards Old Highway 30. KD7RBX has offered space at his bunker, which has actually really good coverage from looking down into the Middleton, Caldwell, Star area. So these coverage plots, I'm just going to give you kind of a green is good analysis on these. So North Command, so this is 146.78, has outstanding coverage. However, noise floor down the valley can be kind of troublesome as a result, because 2 meters is getting noisier and noisier by the year. When we look at the UHF side, we don't have nearly the coverage in the backcountry We don't have really any coverage as far as getting into Emmett or over on, just because of terrain, the way the terrain blocks it. It's much more serious when you're looking at when we're looking into the UHF side of things as far as the way, excuse me, that it handles terrain. Valley Ops, which is our location in downtown Boise, really we're looking at um, along this corridor is really the core of the 275 repeater. So really up and down the river, downtown, up to the edge of the foothills, not into Hidden Springs, not really any further than Eagle. And really that repeater is geared up for handheld coverage. That's kind of part of our cellular vision for lower level repeaters. Once you get into Star, Middleton, really just not really usable coverage. I live in Middleton on a base antenna with 50 watts. I'm only pulling it up at about S2 to S3. So we're just reaching the point where terrain is in the way, as well as it's too far away for that low of a repeater. The Hoot Tower that we're talking about, which is actually going to be located roughly about here on the map, is the exact inverse. So we've got reasonable coverage out towards Notice Wilder, down towards John Kernkamp's house, more or less through the Caldwell region, out and then kind of along the ridge line towards Star. So really there's kind of a no man's land between Star and Eagle that this pair for 275 really won't work for either repeater, which is fine because we don't really have a lot of active events going on right now. But there is coverage from our wilderness repeaters for that kind of area that between Star, Eagle, and as long as we're clear of the terrain. So when we look at all of our fixed UHF repeaters, as far as combined coverage, really that's, if you haven't gotten it from me at this point yet, it's UHF is our future. VHF is for visibility, but UHF is really where things will be our easiest path to really achieve what we're trying to get, which is handheld coverage for events. With everything combined, we look at this as kind of a network option. So anywhere in the green between the three repeaters, linking them together, you can talk anywhere else in the green. The yellow is going to be questionable. The red's just not going to have coverage at all. So like when we look at like up towards Emmett, like, hey, all this green patchy stuff, that's actually up on top of Squaw Butte. So we'd have linking capability up onto any of the assets over towards Squaw Butte, whether they're VOI or N7 UBO or what have you, into that region if we needed to link coverage back into the Boise Valley. So we've got options there. So as far as our roadmap moving forward, again, I mentioned 2022 plus because again, this is stuff that we're looking at. Not everything will happen. A lot of it has to do based on budget, but much of it is going to be, what makes the most sense when to serve our mission, which is serving the community. So RF and audio alignment, there's RF side on repeater and transmitter. The audio alignment is between receiver, transmitter, and controller to make sure that we have balanced audio levels. That is a problem in this valley. If you listen around amongst all the repeaters, some repeaters are louder, some are quieter, especially on linked repeaters. It can be kind of harsh on the ears. So that's something that we're building a preventive maintenance schedule on to routinely look at moving forward and schedule it so that we're actually not just, this isn't an emergency every time that we go up there and then all we're doing is break fix work. The Hoot Tower site engineering and deployment, that is that location towards Caldwell. That was predicated on a tower being erected. It hasn't happened yet. So I need to reach out to Hoot and really figure out, it could be as simple as just strapping some Unistrut onto the side of he's got a shipping container that he set up as his ham shack. So it's a really good base. We just have to pop in some way to get a mast attached to it and then get the equipment deployed into it. Stripping the PL or CTCSS tones from IDs, that's been something that's been identified by the team that could be helpful. That's what we had when we were in standalone mode, so you weren't hearing the Morse code ID on the repeaters unless you were on carrier squelch. So it's a much quieter experience. All you're hearing is really just people talking and nothing else. There's just research that we have to do to figure out if that's going to be something that's easy enough to deploy or if it's going to be problematic, and we'll have to shelf it. Either way, more to come. Crest Condos, getting the controller deployed. We do have the RC210 controller already. Just needs configured and back into RF and audio alignment. Getting that squared up. It's a little bit harder site to get into as far as access. So we really want to make sure that we have everything squared away before we physically take the equipment to the site. It's just much more straightforward that way. With that, looking at deploying RF linking or ARIDN, Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network, which is 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and also 900 megahertz, and also 3.65 gigahertz IP microwave networks. Looking at linking those together towards, again, kind of the vision there is we know that we have reasonable UHF coverage on Wilderness going into State Street North. We have reasonable UHF coverage State Street South on Rimcrest. If we link those two together, then we can have seamless coverage on a handheld throughout the entire downtown area, clear out into basically Eagle without having to have additional jumping on to cross-banding and stuff like that. Additionally, we're also looking at Wilderness to Hoot Tower as an option with RF linking or ARIDN. ARIDN really opens up a lot of options for us. Site telemetry is one of the bigger ones, being able to smartly determine, do I need to take a 4-hour trip up to the site, and what equipment do I need to bring with me, or do I just need to go up there and take it off the air, or is this something that isn't an issue that we just need to be aware of and it can wait until the spring? We really don't have that visibility, that knowledge access right now, and we really need to be able to have that moving forward, really, because again, we're volunteers. We need to be able to respect everybody's time and efforts and capabilities and their passions, and by using data, we can determine really what is necessary and when it needs to be done. Command and control is another option. With ARIDN, with virtual serial ports across IP networks, the ability to log into the repeater and look at what the SWR is and look at what the error messages are, remotely turn up or turn down transmitter power, or flat out disable transmitters. That's all stuff that you can do across an IP network. And then there's also All-Star Link, which is an IP similar to like Echolink, but it's much more refined, much more built out. We can utilize that both intranet, so within ARIDN, within an IP network, or across the internet. If we just had multiple locations that were spread out across, we could utilize that for linking repeaters together. There's also additional options that we can get into. And then further looking into LMR and GMRS to determine really what makes sense for us. We have an enormous amount of gear in surplus, and when we set up our licensing with the FCC for our itinerant hardware, really it was geared towards let's make sure that we are not having to go in and refine this license every time someone donates something new to us. So if you look at the licensing as far as the emission types, because you have to license for frequency, location, emission type, power output, units, so basically the number of transmitters. We licensed for our highest power that we could for every frequency. The UHF frequencies are limited just by the nature of the type of frequency allocation that they are to 35 watts. But the rest, like the VHF and U low band, or 100 or 150 watts, 2,000 units. So we could deploy handhelds for 2,000 people simultaneously still be within the realm of the license. We may not use that now, we may not use that ever, but it's in place and it doesn't cost any different to set it up that way, but it does cost more if we decide to change it in the future. As far as emission types, analog, narrowband, P25 digital, DMR digital, NextDen or IDAS digital, wideband analog for the low band frequencies. Basically anything that was commercially available or commercially that potentially could make it to the surplus market in the future, we went ahead and licensed for that to make sure that we had the option moving forward. So finally, my big thing is thank you. I would not be able to put together the network the way that it is without your hard work, without your continued volunteering on these events. The donations that we receive from these event organizers really go directly into a lot of this equipment. It's hard to say the value of a volunteer because you really just can't put a price on it. You guys take time away from everything else you could possibly be doing with your personal life, with work, with your passions, your interests, everything else, and you've decided to go serve the community and serve the team. And for that, I wanted to thank you. If you have any questions at all, please reach out. I know I went over an immense amount of information over the last hour, but it really hadn't been a while. One that I provided an update to the team as far as, hey, we spend a lot of money on repeaters. Absolutely. First of all, this equipment's expensive. Second of all, we're doing it right the first time. And I wanted to make sure that you guys had visibility of that and transparency to make sure that you are aware of really what the vision is for our network and how it's going to be able to empower you to further help the community in the future. As always, 7-3 AJK6LR. Have a good one.